The sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Elmwood Street, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the shuttered storefronts. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, kicked up by a distant truck rumbling through the outskirts of the forgotten mill town. There, outside a bakery long since padlocked, its windows boarded with faded plywood, a boy no older than 14 huddled against the wall. Evan Cole's clothes hung loose on his frame. Threadbare jeans patched with mismatched fabric, a hoodie zipped tight against the chill that seeped from the concrete. His dark hair fell in unkempt waves over eyes that burned with a quiet desperation. He clutched a crumpled paper bag, empty, save for the ghosts of yesterday's scraps, and his stomach twisted with the hollow ache that had become his constant companion. The street was empty, save for the occasional flicker of a street lamp buzzing to life prematurely. Evan had been here for hours, watching the bakery's door, as if willpower alone could summon the owner back from whatever life had pulled him away. Hunger gnawed deeper now, sharper than the cold wind whispering through the alley. He pushed himself up, legs shaky, and shuffled toward the curb, scanning the horizon for any sign of mercy, a passerby, a delivery van, anything. That's when the low growl cut through the quiet, a deep-throated rumble that vibrated the ground beneath his sneakers. Evan froze as the motorcycle crested the hill, its chrome accents glinting like polished steel in the dying light. The rider was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, leather vest worn smooth from years of road dust, his face weathered by sun and secrets. Marcus Torch Hale throttled down as he approached the intersection, the bike's engine purring like a restrained beast. He wasn't supposed to stop. His route took him straight through town to the Iron Promise clubhouse on the edge of the desert. But something in the boy's silhouette tugged at him, a pull as insistent as an old scar itching under the skin. Torch eased the bike to a halt at the red light, boots planting firm on the pavement. The air smelled of exhaust and faint rain on the breeze, mingling with the stale sweetness that lingered around the bakery's door. Evan hesitated, then stepped forward, his voice barely above the idling motor. "Mister, you got any bread? Or anything? I ain't got money, but I can work for it." The words tumbled out, laced with a defiance that masked the fear in his eyes that held layers of unspoken battles, a spark of hunger not just for food, but for something solid to hold on to. Torch turned his head, helmet visor lifting just enough to reveal a gaze, sharpened by decades of hard choices. He saw it then, in Evan's stare, that defiant flicker over a bed of raw vulnerability, the same look he'd glimpsed years ago in the flickering taillights of a wrecked car on a rain-slicked highway. Back then, under the storm's howl, he'd pulled a kid from the twisted metal, small, scarred, whispering promises of safety that Torch had sworn to keep. Help had come too late. The family vanished into the chaos, and the boy's face haunted him like a half-remembered dream. This boy, Evan. His features echoed that night, the faint scar above his left eyebrow a cruel mirror. The light turned green, but Torch didn't move. The engine idled, a steady thrum against the boy's ragged breaths. "Bread, huh?" Torch's voice was gravel rough, carrying the weight of miles traveled. He killed the motor, the sudden silence amplifying the boy's shallow inhales. Swinging a leg over the bike, he pulled off his helmet, revealing salt and pepper hair cropped close and a jaw set like forged iron. From his saddlebag, he fished out a protein bar, nothing fancy but sustenance wrapped in foil. "Here, ain't bread, but it'll do for now." Evan snatched it, fingers trembling as he tore it open, devouring half in one bite. Crumbs dusted his chin, and for a moment the world narrowed to that simple relief. But Torch wasn't done. He crouched to the boy's level, the leather of his knees creaking softly. Up close, the scar was unmistakable, a jagged line from temple to cheek, faded but telling. "That mark? Where'd you get it, kid?" Evan paused, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, eyes narrowing. Accident. Long time ago. Don't matter now. But it did matter. To Torch. It screamed of unfinished business, of a promise whispered in the dark that the years had buried but not erased. The biker straightened, pulling his phone from his vest pocket. The screen glowed against the encroaching twilight, and he scrolled to a contact labeled simply Iron Promise. His thumb hovered, then pressed call. The line connected on the first ring, a familiar voice crackling through. Torch? What's the play? Nah, not a play, Jax. It's a pull. Got a kid here, Evan Cole. Eyes like that wreck on Route 17, about 10 years back, scar matches. He's out here alone, hungry as hell. We roll now, or that old oath stays broken. There was a pause on the other end, heavy with the club's unspoken code. Lealdad above all, promises that outlast the road. Jax's reply came firm. Crews mobilizing. Coordinates. As Torch relayed the location, Evan watched, confusion etching his features. The protein bar forgotten in his fist, he backed up a step, the wall meeting his shoulders. What? What are you doing? I don't need no pity party. But Torch's eyes held steady, conveying a depth of resolve that silenced the protest. This wasn't pity, it was reckoning. The call ended, and in the distance, the faint roar of engines began to build, like thunder gathering on the horizon. Torch placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, light but unyielding. Listen, Evan, that night I pulled a kid from the flames. I swore I'd find his people, make it right. Lost the trail, but the weight never left. You got that same fire in you. We're not leaving you to fade into these streets. Uvi. The first bike appeared then, headlights piercing the dusk, followed by another and another, a convoy forming like iron links in a chain. Iron Promise wasn't just a club, it was a brotherhood forged in the fires of forgotten wars, where veterans and wanderers bound themselves to causes greater than the open road. Evan's heart pounded, a mix of fear and something warmer flickering to life. The lead rider, Jax, pulled up beside Torch, his massive frame dwarfing the bike. Kid's the spitting image, Jax rumbled, dismounting with a nod to Evan. We got your back, son. No more running solo. The group encircled them, engines humming in unison, a wall of leather and loyalty against the indifferent town. Torch watched as Evan's guarded expression cracked. Just a fraction, the first hint that this encounter might rewrite the script of his solitary struggle. But as the convoy prepared to move, Torch's mind raced ahead. Why was a boy like this adrift in a place like Elmwood? Whispers of systemic shadows, kids vanishing into cracks of bureaucracy, families torn by quiet displacements, had reached the club before. This wasn't coincidence. It was a thread pulling at the edges of something larger, a pipeline of neglect hidden behind official stamps and closed doors. Torch revved his engine, the vibration traveling up his arms like a vow renewed. Hop on, Evan. We're taking you home, not to a house, but to family. The boy climbed behind him, arms tentative around Torch's waist, the warmth of another human a foreign comfort. As they led the ride out of town, the desert wind whipping past, the scent of sage and freedom filling the air, Torch felt the old promise stir to life. What began as a plea for bread was unfolding into a journey of truths unearthed, dignities restored, and bonds that no force could shatter. The road ahead stretched dark and uncertain, but for the first time in years, Torch rode with purpose, not chasing ghosts, but building futures from the ashes of regret. The convoy cut through the twilight like a blade through silk, headlights slicing the encroaching dark as they left Elmwood's skeletal skyline behind. The desert unfolded ahead, vast and unyielding, its sands whispering secrets to the wind that tugged at Evan's hoodie. He clung to Torch's back, the leather vest warm against his chest, the rhythmic thrum of the engine vibrating through his bones like a lullaby he couldn't trust. The air carried the sharp tang of creosote bushes and cooling earth, a far cry from the stale rot of alleyways. For the first time in months, Evan's stomach settled, the protein bar a faint anchor against the nausea of motion and uncertainty. Torch led the pack, Jax flanking his right, the rest of Iron Promise fanning out in a loose V formation, 8 riders strong, their bikes a symphony of growls and pops. These weren't the rogue wolves of old tales. They were men who'd traded battlefield scars for road-worn patches, bound by oaths etched deeper than ink. Jax, with his buzzed head and arms like coiled ropes, rode with eyes scanning the horizon, ever the sentinel. Behind him, Lena Sparks Ruiz, the club's mechanic and quiet enforcer, kept pace on her customized chopper, her ponytail whipping like a flag of defiance. She'd lost a brother to the same shadows that now loomed over Evan, and her presence was a silent vow, no child left to the void. They veered off the highway onto a gravel path that snaked toward the clubhouse, a low-slung bunker of weathered adobe and steel hidden among the dunes. Dust plumes trailed their wheels, illuminated by the fading sun's crimson glow, painting the scene in hues of blood and gold. Evan's grip tightened as the first doubts surfaced, whispers in his mind that this was just another trap, another fleeting kindness before the streets reclaimed him. But Torch's posture, steady as an oak, held him steady. The biker had seen that fracture before, in mirrors and in men who'd stared down worse than abandonment. The clubhouse emerged from the haze, its neon sign flickering Iron Promise in jagged script, the promise word glowing like a beacon. Floodlights bathed the compound in harsh white, revealing rows of parked Harleys under open-air shelters, tool benches scattered with wrenches and half-rebuilt engines. The scent of motor oil and mesquite smoke hung heavy, mingling with the sizzle of a grill firing up in the courtyard. Riders dismounted in a fluid choreography, boots crunching gravel, voices murmuring low greetings. Evan slid off Torch's bike, legs wobbling like a foal's, and stood there, fists balled, taking it all in, these strangers with eyes that didn't judge but assessed, like guardians weighing a new soul. Jax clapped Torch on the shoulder, his voice a low rumble over the dying engines. "Kid's holding it together. Good call bringing him straight here." He turned to Evan, crouching to meet his gaze, the lines around his eyes crinkling with a warmth forged in loss. "Name's Jax. This here's home base for the Promise. You eat first, then we talk. No strings, no rush." Evan nodded warily, following as Sparks led him inside. The interior was a blend of sanctuary and war room. Walls lined with framed photos of rides past, convoy shots under stormy skies, group hugs around a fallen brother, interspersed with maps pinned to corkboards, red strings tracing routes of aid. A long oak table dominated the center, scarred from countless meetings, flanked by mismatched chairs. In the corner, a kitchenette hummed with life. Sparks handed Evan a plate piled with grilled burgers and fresh corn, steam rising like an offering. The boy ate mechanically at first, then with the ferocity of reclaimed time, the juices dripping down his chin, a small rebellion against hunger's grip. Torch watched from across the room, nursing a black coffee that burned his tongue, the steam curling like unresolved questions. He'd pieced together fragments on the ride, Evan's mumbled words about a mom lost to illness, a dad vanished into the system's maw, foster homes that chewed up dreams and spat out shells. But the scar that tied back to the wreck, a chain collision on a fog-shrouded interstate where Torch, fresh from deployment, had stopped on instinct. The kid he'd saved, small, bloodied, had clutched his hand, whispering, "Promise you'll find us." Torch had, or tried. Ambulances came, reports filed, but the family dissolved into paperwork fog. Now, staring at Evan, the pieces aligned like tumblers in a lock. Same eyes, same mark, fate's cruel poetry. As the meal wound down, the club gathered around the table, the air thickening with purpose. Lena pulled up a chair beside Evan, her voice soft but edged with steel. That scar looks like it tells a story. You want to share, or we start digging ourselves?" Evan hesitated, fork midway to his mouth, then set it down. The words spilled haltingly. The crash 10 years back, a family road trip turned nightmare. Mom gone in the wreck, Dad arrested on trumped-up charges, debts twisted into felonies by a crooked clerk. Evan bounced through homes, each colder than the last, until the streets called him free. But freedom tasted like dust. Torch leaned forward, the chair creaking under his weight. "That charge sounds like the kind that sticks without cause. We've seen it. Kids like you funneled into gaps, families splintered by ink and indifference." He glanced at Jax, who nodded, pulling a laptop from a side table. Screens glowed, pulling up generic records, fictional echoes of real shadows, Elmwood Youth Services, reports of displaced miners vanishing into untraceable files. No names, just patterns. A quiet pipeline where vulnerable lives slipped through, greased by overlooked forms and underpaid overseers. Corruption's underbelly, not flashy, but insidious, eroding trust one signature at a time. The room fell quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant howl of coyotes. Evan's face paled, realization dawning. "You mean, it's not just me. They do this on purpose." Sparks placed a hand on his arm, her touch light as a promise. "Not anymore. Iron Promise doesn't chase windmills. We build bridges. Your story's ours now." Torch stood, the decision settling like gravel under tires. "We start with truth. Jax, reach out to our contacts, old vets in the system, nurses who see the fallout. No raids, no noise, just light on the dark spots." The club murmured assent, fists bumping in ritual solidarity. Evan looked around, the circle of faces a fortress against his isolation. For the first time, the scar felt less like a brand and more like a key. Outside, the night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant vows. The convoy would ride again at dawn, not for vengeance, but for reclamation. Unearthing records, connecting dots, turning regret into resolve. Torch stepped onto the porch, the cool air brushing his skin, carrying the faint echo of engines cooling. Evan joined him, silent but present, the weight between them shifting from burden to bond. In the quiet, Torch murmured, "That promise from the wreck, it's alive. We're keeping it, kid. Together." As the clubhouse lights dimmed, the desert held its breath, the road ahead a canvas for justice's slow burn. What began with a boy's plea echoed now in the hearts of the chosen, a ripple promising to flood the cracks of neglect. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. Dawn broke over the Iron Promise clubhouse like a reluctant witness, its pale light filtering through the slatted blinds to paint golden stripes across the oak table. The air inside carried the remnants of last night's meal, faint char from the grill, the earthy bite of cooling coffee, mingling with the sharper tang of printer paper and fresh ink from the stack of documents Jax had pulled overnight. Evan sat at the table's edge, his hoodie sleeves tugged over his hands, fingers tracing the wood scars as if mapping his own. Sleep had come fitfully on a cot in the back room, haunted by fragments of the crash and the unfamiliar security of walls that didn't echo with shouts. Now, in the quiet hours before the desert fully woke, the weight of shared stories pressed down, turning vulnerability into fuel. Torch paced the room's perimeter, his boots scuffing softly against the Saltillo tiles, each step a measured beat in the rhythm of resolve. He'd barely closed his eyes, the boy's confession replaying like a looped reel. The wreck's chaos, a father's wrongful fall, the foster system's indifferent churn. But it was the scar that anchored it all, a physical echo pulling threads from Torch's past into the present. He stopped at the corkboard, eyes narrowing on the red strings, lines connecting aid runs, lost causes reclaimed. This wasn't just Evan's fight. It was a mirror to the club's own scars, promises made in foxholes and on rain-slick roads where brotherhood meant catching those who slipped. Jax hunched over the laptop, his thick fingers navigating screens with surprising delicacy, the blue glow casting shadows under his brow. "Got a thread," he said, voice low to spare the boy's frayed nerves. "Elmwood Youth Services, fictional front for a web of underfunded oversight. Records show your dad's arrest tied to a debt recovery scam. Clerk named Harlan Voss signing off on escalated charges. No trial transcripts, just sealed files buried in digital dust." He turned the screen toward Evan, pixels flickering like distant stars. The boy leaned in, breath catching at the blurred photo of a man with familiar eyes. His father, frozen in a mugshot from a decade ago, face etched with the same defiant spark. Evan's throat tightened, the corn from last night turning to lead in his gut. "They said he ran, left us after Mom, after the crash, but he didn't. I remember him fighting, yelling about papers they wouldn't show." His voice cracked, not with tears, but with the raw edge of betrayal unearthed. Spark slid a glass of water his way, her calloused hand brushing his briefly, a gesture of solidarity from someone who'd pieced her own life back from similar ruins. "It's the gaps, kid. Places where signatures fade and kids like you end up adrift. We've pulled files on 3 others from Elmwood in the last year. Same pattern. Families splintered by administrative errors." The door creaked open, admitting a rush of cool morning air laced with sage and dew-kissed sand. Lena's brother-in-arms, a wiry veteran called Doc, club medic with a limp from an old blast, entered carrying a battered briefcase, his face lined like weathered leather. He'd spent the night calling in favors from nurses at the fictional Santa Esperanza hospital, voices on the line whispering of patterns too neat to be chance. "Talk to a charge nurse," Doc reported, snapping open the case to reveal dog-eared folders. "Kids from wrecks or crises get rerouted, foster placements that expire without notice. Your mum's death certificate lists the crash, but follow-ups vanished. And that Clark Voss, he's got ties to a relocation firm moving unclaimed minors out of state. Quiet, legal on paper, but it leaves trails of empty beds." Torch absorbed it, the pieces slotting into a grim mosaic. The pipeline wasn't a monster with fangs. It was a machine of apathy, gears turning on overlooked forms and understaffed desks, displacing lives for profit masters' procedure. His mind flashed to the wreck, the rain pounding like accusations, the child's hand in his, the promise gasped amid sirens. "We hit Voss first," he decided, voice steady as rebar. "No confrontation. Observation, then leverage through truth. Get a contact in the system to pull his logs." But doubt flickered in Jax's eyes. A shadow of the ethical tightrope they walked. Pushing too hard could spook them, scatter the kids deeper. We've seen clubs burn for less, raids that backfire into worse isolation. Evan shifted, the chair groaning under him, his gaze darting between the men like a cornered animal assessing escape. "You don't have to. I can go back, handle it solo. Don't want you getting dragged into my mess." The words hung, laced with the old fear of attachment's cost, but Torch met them head-on, crouching again to level their stares. The room's light caught the scar on the boy's brow, mirroring the faint one Torch bore on his forearm from that same night, a burn from prying metal. "Solo's what got you here, Evan. Iron Promise isn't about fixing messes, it's about owning them together. That promise I made, it wasn't to a ghost, it was to the fight, the one against forgetting." Sparks nodded, firing up the coffee maker with a click that echoed like a loaded chamber. "We ride smart. Doc, you and I scout the services building at noon. Low profile, just eyes. Jax, dig digital, Torch, you and the kids stay put, build the case." The plan wove through the air, a web of quiet actions. each thread pulling toward exposure without the blaze of violence. Evan watched, the circle of resolve chipping at his walls. For the first time, the hunger in his eyes softened, not sated, but shared, the weight distributed among shoulders broader than his own. Outside, the sun climbed, baking the gravel into shimmering waves, the distant hum of waking engines a prelude to motion. Torch led Evan to the courtyard, where Harleys stood sentinel, chrome gleaming under the rising heat. He handed the boy a wrench from the tool bench, the metal cool and heavy. "Start small. Help Sparks tune her ride. Learn the road before we take it." Evan took it, fingers curling around the handle, the act a bridge from spectator to participant. As they worked, oil smudging their hands, the desert breeze carried whispers of coyotes fading into day, the club's quiet power stirring like embers fanned to flame. By midday, the scout pair returned, faces taut with findings. Voss's office, a nondescript strip in Elmwood's shadow, buzzed with the shuffle of files and hurried calls, leads on a network funneling kids to remote rehab sites, euphemisms for forgotten corners. No direct proof yet, but the scent of rot was unmistakable, a moral decay that demanded sunlight. Torch gathered the club in the shade of the mesquite tree, its leaves rustling like pages turning. "This pipeline ends with us," he said, the words a vow etched in the dry air. "Not for glory, but for the promises that bind us." Evan stood among them, the wrench still in his pocket, a talisman of belonging. The scar on his face caught the light, no longer a mark of loss, but a beacon guiding the way forward. As the convoy prepped for the next leg, subtle inquiries, alliances forged in hushed tones, the desert stretched endless, a canvas for redemption's patient march. The road whispered of dilemmas ahead, consciences tested against corruption's veil. But in the brotherhood's unyielding grip, doubt yielded to duty. What had started with a plea for bread now pulsed with the heartbeat of justice, slow and inexorable, promising to mend what the system had torn. The midday sun beat down on the Iron Promise clubhouse like a relentless interrogator, turning the gravel courtyard into a shimmering haze that distorted the air. Heat waves danced off the Harley's chrome tanks, the metal ticking softly as it expanded, while the faint sizzle of distant thunderheads promised rain that might never come. Evan wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his oil-streaked hand, the wrench still warm in his grip from tightening Sparks' chain. The work had grounded him. Each turn of the tool a small victory against the chaos in his head. The crash's echo, the father's ghost, the system's indifferent grind. Beside him, Sparks nodded approval, her grease-smeared rag tossed aside as she revved the engine to test the tune. The roar cut through the stillness, a guttural affirmation that vibrated through Evan's chest, syncing with the quickened pulse of belonging. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the sharp scent of cooling electronics and the musty undertone of old files spread across the oak table. Torch stood over the maps, his finger tracing a route back to Elmwood's underbelly, the strip mall where Voss's office squatted like a toad in the weeds. Jax had amplified the morning's findings, digital breadcrumbs leading to shell companies, relocation services that funneled displaced kids to remote outposts under the guise of therapy. No faces named, just patterns, foster records expiring like milk left in the sun, families notified too late or not at all. The laptop screen glowed with anonymized logs, red flags blinking like warning lights on a dashboard at dusk. Doc leaned against the wall, his limp more pronounced in the heat, a thermos of herbal tea steaming in his hand. Nurse at Santa Esperanza confirmed it. 3 boys last month, same profile as you, Evan. Wrecks or crises, then poof, placed in transitional care. That's anything but. Voss signs the orders, some higher-up rubber stamps. It's not conspiracy with spotlights, it's the quiet kind, where apathy wears a suit. His voice carried the weight of too many bedside vigils, eyes distant, as if replaying scenes from operating rooms where hope flatlined. Evan hovered at the table's edge. The plate of cornbread Sparks had pushed his way untouched. The crumbs mocked him, a reminder of the bakery's empty door. If it's all connected, my dad. He was yelling about a loan shark twisting debts into jail time. Voss was the clerk, said the papers were final. The words tasted bitter, like dust swallowed on the road, but saying them aloud wove him tighter into the circle. Torch met his gaze, the biker's eyes reflecting the boy's resolve, scarred but unbowed. Final on paper, maybe, but promises aren't ink. We verify, then we pull the thread, gently, so the whole web doesn't snap back. The ethical snag twisted in the room's undercurrent, a tension thicker than the desert air. Jax rubbed his jaw, stubble rasping under calloused fingers. Leverage means risk. We tip Voss, he shreds files, kids scatter deeper, or we go official, tips to investigators. But that machine eats its own whistleblowers. His words hung, a dilemma etched in the lines of his face. The club's code clashing against the allure of swift justice. Violence was the easy rev, restraint, the true test of honor. Sparks crossed her arms, her ponytail damp with sweat. We've danced this before, lost a prospect to a corrupt sheriff's grudge. Action without wisdom burns bridges we need. The group murmured, heads nodding in the shadowed corners. The weight of past regrets a silent partner in the debate. Torch exhaled slowly, the sound like air hissing from a cooling tire. He pulled a chair for Evan, the wood scraping softly, inviting the boy into the fray. Your call weighs heavy here, kid. We're not storming gates, that's for movies, but ignoring the rot, that's complicity. Evan sat, the seat enveloping him like an unearned trust, his fingers drumming the table's edge. Memories flooded, nights in foster lockers, the scar throbbing like an accusation. I don't want anyone hurt 'cause of me, but if there's more like me out there, fading into nothing, we can't just watch. The admission cracked the air. Vulnerability met with nods. No pity, just the quiet steel of shared scars. Decision forged in the heat. They mobilized with precision. Jax and Doc would embed digitally, forging alliances with a retired judge contact, fictional echoes of real guardians, voices from the system's fringes willing to probe without fanfare. Sparks and two others scouted Voss's perimeter again, cameras hidden in saddlebags, capturing the shuffle of couriers and locked cabinets. Torch and Evan stayed central, piecing Evan's fragmented recollections into a timeline. The crash's date blurred by years, but the hospital's scent, antiseptic and fear, still vivid. Tell me more, Torch urged, voice low as they pored over a notepad. The pen scratched a rhythmic anchor. Evan described the dad's last embrace, rough hands promising return, the courtroom's cold echo where Voss's signature sealed the fracture. As afternoon waned, the convoy split, engines growling to life in staggered waves, dust clouds blooming like smoke signals. Torch watched them go from the porch, the sun dipping toward the dunes, casting elongated shadows that merged man and machine. Evan joined him, the wrench pocketed like a talisman, his posture straighter, the hoodie's hood pushed back to reveal the scar fully. Feels real, the boy said, voice tentative against the wind's hush, like I'm not just surviving anymore. Torch clapped his shoulder, the leather creaking, a bond solidifying in the golden light. Real's what we make it. That old promise? It's multiplying. Yours, mine, the club's, no ghosts left behind. The first report crackled over the radio as dusk bruised the sky. Sparks spotting a van unloading boxes at Voss's door, labels hinting at youth transfers. No faces, but the pattern solidified. A pipeline pulsing with quiet displacement. Tension coiled, ethical lines blurring under the pressure of unseen children adrift. Back inside, the table became a war map. strings tightening, resolve hardening like cooling metal. Evan traced a line to his father's potential location, a remote facility veiled in euphemisms, hope flickering amid the dread. The desert night crept in, stars emerging like witnesses, the air cooling to carry the faint whine of returning bikes. In the lamplight, Torch raised a mug, the club's ritual toast, to truths unearthed without breaking what we stand for. Glasses clinked, the sound a vow against the encroaching dark. Evan joined, the liquid warm on his tongue, the circle closing around him, a family chosen in the forge of necessity. Outside, coyotes yipped, echoing the wild uncertainty ahead, but within, the heartbeat of justice thrummed steady. The road to Voss loomed, dilemmas sharpening like a blade on whetstone, promising confrontations not of fists, but of conscience. What had ignited with a boy's hunger now burned toward revelation, mending fractures one honorable step at a time. If this chapter stirred something in you, the quiet fire of promises kept, hit that like button. Your support fuels these stories of redemption and unbreakable bonds. The desert night clung to the Iron Promise Clubhouse like a shroud, stars scattered across the ink-black sky, as if flung from a careless hand. The air had cooled to a crisp bite, carrying the faint, acrid whiff of exhaust from the returning scouts' bikes, now parked in silent rows under the floodlights. Inside, the lamplight pooled on the oak table, casting elongated shadows that danced with every shift of bodies. Evan sat cross-legged on the floor by Torch's chair, a notebook open in his lap, the pages filled with his halting scrawl, names half-remembered, dates pieced from nightmares. The scar on his brow caught the warm glow, a silver thread in the dimness, no longer hidden but worn like a badge of emerging strength. Torch leaned against the table, arms crossed over his leather vest, the creak of the wood underscoring his steady breaths. The radio's static had faded, leaving Sparks' report to echo in the room. The van at Voss's door, boxes stamped with vague labels, Youth Outreach Initiative, hinting at shipments of lives repackaged for obscurity. No direct evidence, but the pieces aligned like gears in a hidden clock, ticking toward exposure. Jax paced nearby, his boots thudding softly on the tiles, the laptop screen reflecting in his furrowed brow. Those transfers, they're routing to a compound out by the salt flats, fenced, guarded, but not a prison. More like a way station where kids adjust before vanishing into labor gigs or worse. Voss is the gatekeeper. Pull him, the flow stops. Doc nodded from his perch on a stool, thermos refilled with steaming tea that fogged the air with chamomile's subtle earthiness. His eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, held the clinical detachment of someone who'd stitched too many wounds born of neglect. Hospital logs match. Admissions from Elmwood Spikes on Voss's signature days. No follow-ups, just discharge to family services. We've got enough for a pattern, but proof. That's the knife's edge. Tip the wrong hand, and they bury it deeper. The words hung heavy, the ethical bind twisting tighter. Justice demanded action, but recklessness could doom the very souls they sought to save. The club's code, honor over haste, strained against the urgency, a moral taut wire humming in the quiet. Evan looked up from his notes, the pencil gripped like a lifeline. Graphite dust smudging his fingers, the cornbread from earlier sat heavy in his stomach, a rare fullness now laced with purpose. The salt flats. Dad mentioned a place like that once before they took him. Said it was where promises go to die. His voice was steadier than before, the boy's frame filling out the hoodie with newfound resolve, but doubt flickered in his eyes. The fear that digging deeper might unearth only more loss. Torch crouched beside him, the floorboards groaning under his weight, his hand resting lightly on the notebook's edge. The biker's palm, rough from years of throttle and wrench, conveyed a warmth that seeped through the paper. Promises don't die, Evan. They wait. We've all carried ones like yours. Mine from that wreck, Jax's from a convoy gone wrong. This pipeline, it's feeding on the forgotten. We starve it with light, not fire. Sparks entered from the kitchenette, wiping her hands on a rag that smelled of solvent and sage, her face taut from the ride's revelations. She slid a mug of cocoa toward Evan, the steam curling like a question mark. Scouted the perimeter. Cameras caught a kid, maybe 12, loading those boxes. Looked scared, but not broken. Yet. Her words painted the scene, the van's taillights bleeding red into the dusk, the boy's slight figure dwarfed by shadows, a silent plea in the way he glanced over his shoulder. The image seared into the room, fueling the tension, the group's breath sinking in a rhythm of restrained fury. Lena's eyes met Torch's, a silent exchange of the club's unspoken vow: protect the vulnerable, dismantle the machine without becoming it. The dilemma crested as Jax pulled up a new file, the screen's glow illuminating a grainy photo, Voss, mid-40s, slick hair, and a smile too polished for the shadows he cast. He's meeting someone tomorrow, coffee shop on the edge of town. Neutral ground, we could tail, listen, plant a bug if it fits the code. But hesitation rippled through the circle. Surveillance skirted legality's grey, a step from the clean path's iron-promised tread. Doc shook his head, tea sloshing softly. Bugs mean intrusion, risk of backlash. We've lost brothers to entanglements like that, cops twisting protection into persecution. Evan shifted, the cocoa's warmth forgotten in his lap. What if we just talk to him? Show him Evan's story, the scar, the wreck, make it personal. The suggestion hung, naive yet piercing, a boy's faith clashing with the men's scarred pragmatism. Torch straightened, the decision settling like dust after a storm. Personal's the key, but timed right. No ambush. Jax, you and Sparks, shadow the meet. Eyes only, no contact. Doc, reach your nurse again. See if she can corroborate a transfer name. Evan and I hold here, refine the timeline. We build the case airtight, then approach Voss on our terms, not as threats but as the conscience he buried. The plan wove through the air, threads of caution and courage intertwining, the ethical suspense coiling like a spring. Nods circled the table, fists bumping in quiet affirmation, the ritual sealing their path. Sparks rose first, grabbing her keys with a jingle that cut the stillness. Dawn ride, keep the home fires steady. She ruffled Evan's hair lightly, a sister's touch, before heading out, the doors click, echoing like a loaded breath. Alone with Torch, Evan traced the notebook's lines, the lamplight softening the edges of his face. The clubhouse hummed faintly. Fridges drone, winds whisper against adobe walls. A sanctuary amid the brewing storm. You really think one man's signature started all this? Torch sat beside him, the chair's creak a companionable sigh, pulling a faded photo from his vest, the wreck's aftermath, blurred figures in rain, a child's hand blurred in the frame. One signature, maybe, but it's the silence after that builds the pipeline. I broke my promise once, lost the trail, won't again. The words bridged them, Evan's scar mirroring Torch's faint burn mark, scars as shared language. The boy leaned back, the floor cool against his spine, a tentative smile cracking the tension. Feels like family's not just blood, like I got a shot at more than scraping by. Outside, the night deepened, coyotes' distant calls weaving through the dark, a reminder of the wild unknowns. The convoy would roll at first light, engines stirring the sands toward Voss's shadowed world. Inside, Torch doused the lamp, the room fading to moonlight's silver wash, Evan curling on the cot with the notebook clutched close. Sleep came in fits, dreams of roads untraveled, promises blooming like desert flowers after rain. The ethical wire held taut, dilemmas sharpening with each tick of the clock. Confront corruption without corruption, redeem the lost through unyielding honor. As stars wheeled overhead, the clubhouse stood sentinel, its heartbeat sinking with the road's inexorable pull, justice's slow forge heating toward dawn's revelation. The bond between biker and boy solidified, a chosen family rising against the indifferent tide, turning personal regret into collective light. The first light of dawn sliced through the desert haze like a blade, gilding the Iron Promise clubhouse in hues of amber and rose. The air hummed with anticipation, crisp and laced with the metallic tang of dew on chrome, as engines coughed to life in the courtyard. Torch adjusted his helmet strap, the leather creaking softly under his fingers, while Evan stood nearby, his borrowed vest too large but worn with a tentative pride. The boy's eyes, shadowed by the hoodie's brim, held a mix of resolve and the lingering chill of night-dreamed doubts. The notebook from last evening lay tucked in Torch's saddlebag, its pages a testament to truths pieced together. Evan's fragmented memories now mapped against the pipeline's cold architecture. Jax revved his bike, the deep growl vibrating through the gravel, kicking up fine dust that swirled like whispered warnings. Sparks flanked him, her chopper's exhaust popping sharp against the quiet, while Doc lingered at the edge, thermos in hand, his limp a subtle hitch as he mounted up. The plan was etched in their nods. Shadow Voss's meet at the roadside diner, eyes sharp for slips in the clerk's polished facade, no direct touch. "Keep it clean," Torch had said at the briefing, his voice gravel over steel, the ethical line drawn firm. Gather the light without igniting the dark. Evan watched them roll out, taillights fading into the rising sun, a knot tightening in his chest. Staying behind felt like tethering a wild horse, but Torch's steady presence anchored him, the biker's hand on his shoulder, a silent oath. They turned to the workshop, the scent of oil and heated metal enveloping them, like an old friend. Torch handed Evan a socket set, the tools clinking softly in the boy's palms. "While they're out, we prep the approach. Refine what you'll say if it comes to facing Voss." Evan nodded, kneeling beside a workbench strewn with parts, gears and wires that mirrored the tangled threads of his past. As they worked, the rhythm of wrench on bolt became a dialogue, words spilling between turns. Evan described the courtroom's sterile hush, Voss's pen scratching like a predator's claw, sealing his father's fate with indifferent strokes. "He looked right at me, like I was just another file, no eyes, no soul." Torch listened, his own hand steady on a carburetor, the faint scar on his forearm catching the light. A burn from the wreck, a reminder of promises deferred. The morning stretched, the sun climbing to bake the adobe walls, sweat beading on their brows amid the workshop's humid warmth. Torch shared fragments of his own road, deployments where brothers fell to unseen traps, the Iron Promise born from those ashes as a bulwark against forgetting. "We don't fight with fists first," he said, wiping grease from his knuckles with a rag that smelled of solvent and resolve. "Honor wins by standing tall when the easy path calls." Evan absorbed it, the tools in his grip feeling less foreign, the act of building something solid, a counter to the voids he'd known. Doubt lingered, though. The fear that Voss's web might ensnare them all, turning saviors into suspects in a system rigged for silence. Midday brought the crackle of the radio, Jax's voice cutting through static like a lifeline. "Meet's underway. Voss with a suit, talking transfers, names dropped. 3 kids from Elmwood routed to the flats last week. No visuals, but he's sweating the details." The words hung in the workshop air, heavy as the noonday heat, painting scenes of hurried whispers over coffee steam, Voss's fingers drumming a nervous tattoo on the diner's formica. Sparks chimed in, her tone edged with steel. "Van's circling back, same plates as last night. We're tailing light, but it's tightening. Patterns point to a bigger hand. Voss is mid-level, passing orders." Torch's jaw set, the ethical suspense coiling anew. Push now. Risk scattering the vulnerable. Wait, and the pipeline churned on, lives slipping through like sand. Evan's heart raced, the socket slipping from his fingers to clatter on the concrete, echoing his inner turmoil. That's them. Kids like me, just gone. Torch steadied him with a look, the biker's eyes conveying the club's unyielding core, justice not as vengeance, but as the slow unveiling of truth. We confirm, then we move. No lone wolves. As the radio fell silent, they stepped outside, the desert wind whipping sand against their legs, carrying the faint rumble of approaching thunder from distant peaks. The horizon shimmered, a veil between revelation and regret, the clubhouse's neon sign flickering faintly even in daylight, a promise etched in light. Afternoon waned into a tense vigil, the radio sporadic with updates. Voss parting ways with the suit, a briefcase exchanged under the diner's awning, shadows lengthening as the convoy looped back. When they arrived, dust-caked and grim, the courtyard filled with the acrid bite of hot brakes and urgency. Jax dismounted first, pulling off his helmet to reveal sweat-matted hair, his face a map of restrained fire. Got audio snippets, Voss mentioning gaps in oversight like it's a perk. Names match hospital logs, displaced miners, no family trace. The suit, tied to that relocation firm, pushing quotas. Sparks added details, her voice low as she unloaded a hidden dash cam. Grainy footage of the exchange, Voss's profile sharp against the diner's faded paint, a flicker of unease in his posture. Doc reviewed the files in the main room, the table now a fortress of printouts and screens, the air thick with chamomile and cooling engines. Corroborates everything. Your dad's charge, Evan, was the entry point. Debt flipped to felony via Voss's stamp, family splintered. But the pipeline's wider. Veterans' kids, crash survivors, funneled for rehab that masks exploitation. The revelation landed like a punch held back, the group's breaths sinking in the lamplight's glow. Ethical dilemmas sharpened. Confront Voss alone, personal and raw, or weave allies into the net, risking dilution of the truth. Jax leaned in, fists on the table. We go to him tonight. Your story, Evan, the scar, the wreck. Make it human, not a raid. But back up close. If he bolts, we follow the trail. Evan stood, the vest's weight a newfound armor, his scar a beacon in the softening light. Fear twisted with fire, the boy's voice steady. He needs to see what his signatures leave behind. No more hiding. Torch nodded, pride flickering in his gaze, the bond between them a quiet forge. The club mobilized subtly, bikes prepped for a night ride. Paths scouted to Voss's Elmwood address, a nondescript bungalow on the town's frayed edge. No thunderous convoy. This was shadows and conscience, the power of presence over force. As twilight bled into night, the desert cooled, stars emerging like silent sentinels. Torch and Evan led the subtle approach, engines muffled on the outskirts, the air scented with creosote and resolve. Voss's home loomed, porchlight casting a feeble halo over unkempt grass, windows glowing with the blue flicker of a television. They parked at a distance, hearts pounding in unison, the ethical precipice yawning. One wrong word, and the fragile light could shatter. Torch placed a hand on Evan's arm, the touch a vow. Together, for the promises that outlast the dark. The door knocked echoed like fate's summons, Voss's silhouette appearing hesitant in the frame. His eyes widened at Evan, recognition dawning slow, the scar's mirror pulling ghosts from the clerk's buried past. The confrontation unfolded in hushed tones, truths spilling like rain on parched earth, accusations met with deflection, then cracks in the facade. Voss's voice trembled, admissions trickling, the pipeline's quiet greed, families bartered for bonuses, his role a cog turned by fear of exposure. No violence, just the weight of moral gravity, Evan's gaze unyielding, Torch's presence a wall of integrity. As details poured, locations of the Salt Flats compound, names of displaced kids, the radio whispered from the shadows. Jax confirming the van's route. Sparks ready to intercept. The night air thickened with possibility, redemption's thread pulling taut. Voss, cornered by conscience, handed over a key drive, digital keys to the web. Evan clutched it, the plastic warm in his palm, the scar no longer a wound, but a seal on the turning tide. Back at the clubhouse, the club gathered under the stars, the drive's contents unfolding patterns of rescue. Coordinates, files, paths to the lost. But shadows lingered, Voss's warning of a higher pull, the suit's network deeper than one man's fall. The ethical fire burned brighter, dilemmas resolving into action. Dawn raids on the flats, not with force, but with warrants forged from truth, allies from the fringes mobilized. Torch watched Evan sleep on the cot, the boy's face peaceful for the first time, the notebook beside him a chronicle of mending. The desert whispered of climaxes ahead, loyalties tested in the final stretch. But in the chosen family's grip, regret yielded to legacy. What began with hunger now forged unbreakable chains, justice's slow dawn breaking over the horizon. The desert dawn unfurled like a banner of fragile hope, its pale light bleeding across the salt flats where the compound squatted, a squat fortress of chain link and weathered prefab buildings, ringed by dunes that swallowed sound and secrets alike. The air hung heavy with the briny sting of evaporated seas and the faint metallic bite of rusting gates, a place where promises came to wither under the indifferent sun. Torch's convoy approached in a muted procession, engines throttled low to murmur like distant thunder, their headlights off against the creeping glow. 8 riders, shadows on steel, carried not weapons but warrants, papers forged from Voss's reluctant confession, backed by the nurse's testimony and Jax's digital unearthing, no blaze of glory. This was justice's measured stride. Honor etched in restraint. Evan rode pillion behind Torch, the borrowed vest cinched tight against the morning chill, his fingers gripping the biker's waist with a steadiness born of the night's revelations. The key drive's contents burned in his mind, coordinates to this very outpost, lists of names, 37 kids, ages 8 to 16, rerouted through Voss's pipeline, their files stamped unclaimed like discarded cargo. His father's name topped one, a veteran ground down by fabricated debts, now laboring in the compound's shadowed workshops, piecing electronics for faceless firms. The scar on Evan's brow itched under the rising heat, a reminder that this ride closed a decade's circle, turning personal ghosts into communal light. They dismounted at the perimeter, boots sinking into the crusty salt, the crunch echoing like brittle bones. Jax led the flank, his massive frame a sentinel in the half-light, while Sparks and Doc fanned out with clipboards and badges, fictional credentials from allied fringes, nurses and vets posing as oversight inspectors. The gate guard, a lanky man with eyes dulled by routine, squinted at the papers, the wind whipping sand against his uniform like accusatory grains. Routine audit, Jax rumbled, voice low and unyielding, the club's code pulsing beneath. Truth as the sharpest blade, no resistance. The machine of apathy crumbled under scrutiny's weight, the guard stepping aside with a shrug that masked unease. Inside, the compound stirred to life. Children's voices murmuring from low barracks, the clatter of breakfast trays mingling with the hum of generators. Evan scanned the faces as they moved through the central yard, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, piercing the enclosures. There, by the workshop door, a man in faded overalls, mid-40s, his frame lean from years of toil, eyes lifting with a spark of disbelieving recognition. "Evan?" The word cracked the air, raw as the salt underfoot, as the father dropped his tools, crossing the space in hurried strides. Arms enveloped the boy, rough and trembling, the scent of sweat and machine oil a homecoming balm. No words at first, just the press of shared scars, Evan's visible, his father's hidden in hollowed cheeks and calloused hands. Torch watched from the sidelines, the reunion a quiet vindication. His own promise from the wreck's rain-slick night fulfilled in this sun-baked moment. Jax coordinated the exodus, voices calm as families were notified via secure lines, retired judges pulling strings, nurses prepping reunions at Santa Esperanza's neutral ground. The kids emerged tentative, clutching meager belongings. A 12-year-old with wide eyes clutching a stuffed bear worn threadbare, another sketching patterns in the dirt with a stick, dreams deferred but not erased. Sparks knelt to their level, her voice a steady anchor. You're heading home, or to one that chooses you. No more gaps. The pipeline's victims, once funneled into obscurity, now stepped into daylight, the compound's gates swinging wide like a long-held breath released. But closure carried its shadows. Voss's warning echoed in Torch's ear. The suit's higher web, a network of firms profiting from the displaced, tentacles reaching beyond Elmwood into shadowed boardrooms. As the last child boarded the waiting vans, neutral transports arranged through allies, the father pulled Torch aside, grip firm on the biker's arm. You kept a vow I never knew. That crash. I thought we'd vanished for good. Torch nodded, the desert wind tugging at his vest, carrying the faint echo of engines idling. Promises outlast paper. Iron Promise doesn't forget. The exchange sealed it, redemption not as erasure, but as legacy. The father's freedom a spark to ignite broader fires, tips funneled to investigators, patterns exposed without the club's direct blaze. The convoy reformed on the flat's edge, dust plumes rising as they wheeled toward the clubhouse, the sun now a fierce orb overhead, baking the salt into mirrors of fractured light. Evan rode taller, his father's van trailing in the protected rear. The weight of isolation lifted like fog burned away. Laughter filtered from the vehicles, kids chattering, a tentative symphony against the wind's howl. Jax flanked the lead, his radio crackling with confirmations. Files unsealed, Voss's superiors under quiet scrutiny, the pipeline's flow stanched at its Elmwood heart. No arrests yet, but the moral tide had turned. Corruption's veil thinning under the pressure of truths unearthed, consciences stirred by a boy's defiant eyes. Back at the clubhouse, the courtyard filled with arrivals, the air alive with the sizzle of a victory grill. Burgers charring, corn steaming, the scent weaving through reunions under the mesquite's shade. Evan stood with his father, words tumbling in the spaces between bites, the scar on his face catching the light like a healed rift. Torch joined the circle, Jax and Sparks nearby, Doc pouring tea with a nod to the healed. The club encircled them, leather and loyalty a fortress, chosen family expanding to embrace the newly found. "This ain't the end," Torch said, voice gravel soft over the murmurs. "It's the promise renewed for every kid we pull from the edges." Fists bumped, the ritual a vow against future voids, honor's quiet legacy pulsing in the desert's vast embrace. As evening draped the dunes in purple twilight, stars pricking the sky like enduring lights, Evan traced the clubhouse's scarred table, the notebook closed beside him, a chronicle complete. The road had transformed a plea for bread into a bridge across years, hunger sated not by scraps but by bonds unbreakable. Torch stepped onto the porch, the cool breeze carrying sage and freedom, watching the horizon where shadows once loomed. Regret's ashes had forged something stronger, justice moral and unyielding, a family woven from sacrifice, promises surviving the cynic's storm. In the quiet, the engines cooled, but the heartbeat of redemption thrummed on, echoing into the endless night. Thank you for riding this journey with us. From a boy's desperate plea to the unbreakable chains of chosen family. If these stories of honor and quiet courage move you, hit that subscribe button and join the Iron Promise tribe. Your support keeps the road open for more tales of redemption. Until the next chapter.